Alright troops, welcome back to Tired Old Hack. I'm your man Chris Scullion. You may have noticed that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles The Cowabunga Collection has been announced for release later this year, and it's instantly shot to my number one most wanted game of the year. And the main reason for that is because as a youth I absolutely rinsed loads of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games, or Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles as it was known over here, mainly because I just adored everything about that series. And yeah, so now this collection is going to put 13 of them in one big bundle on Xbox, PlayStation, Switch and PC. But obviously because a lot of these games, most of them were released in the early 90s, a couple of them were even released in the late 80s, there'll be some people who don't really know what they were or what was in them, so your man has decided to break down all 13 games so you can get a better idea of what was in each one and why they're so great. So let's get cracking. First up was the cleverly named Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the NES, because after all, if you're going to bring out a game about a licensed IP, you should probably give it the same name as that IP. So sure enough, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was the first ever Turtles game, released on the NES in kind of mid-89, and had you playing as all four Turtles, you could pause the screen at any point and switch between the four Turtles, and they each had their own abilities. Basically Donatello was incredible and all the rest were average. Raphael was just absolutely useless because his weapon didn't go very far at all. Donatello was a beast. But the point was, if any of the Turtles lost their health, they were out for the rest of the game. So you had to kind of keep swapping between them. The game was kind of notoriously difficult at times. There were a few kind of odd kind of jumps that have since become infamous on the internet. Really hard jumps to make. And there's a kind of water stage where you had to defuse lots of bombs that is kind of notorious for being what people say is one of the most difficult things, and there's far from the most difficult thing in the 8-bit days. It's even far from the most difficult thing in Turtles video games, as you'll see later. But yeah, it was still a tricky game, and overall one of the most difficult in the compilation, but still a classic. Also released in 1989 was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for arcades, and this was the first kind of truly fantastic Turtles game. Obviously the NES one was brilliant, but this was the one that when you saw it in the arcade you were like, wow, this is the Turtles. It played the theme music at the start, it had voice acting, the full shebang, and this is your typical kind of side-scrolling beat 'em up, like kind of Final Fight style. It was fantastic. You had all the four Turtles you could choose between. You had lots of enemies from the cartoon to fight, Bebop and Rocksteady and the like. Shredder popping up every now and then to kidnap April O'Neil. It was fantastic. It was quite difficult because that's the kind of arcade way. Arcade games back then kind of did everything they could to make you put more money in, so expect a lot of deaths in this one. But hopefully, I would imagine the Cowabunga Collection will give you infinite continues, so you can kind of brute force your way through it and see everything it's got to offer. Now the arcade game was so popular, and NES owners were saying, well, why have we got this platformer, why do we not get the arcade game? So Konami then released Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, on the NES, and it was basically what you would expect as an 8-bit port of the arcade game, and it was pretty authentic for what it was, like, given that obviously the NES was infinitely less powerful than arcade hardware at the time. It's obviously a huge downgrade, but it was still playable. It's still, some of the stages were actually a wee tiny bit longer, but despite that, the combat was a wee bit off. Like, you couldn't basically attack an enemy by walking up to them and hitting the attack button over and over again. The second attack would always miss because the enemy was still kind of recoiling, so you had to do this weird thing where you hit, move away, move back and hit, move away, move back and hit, which makes it quite awkward. And if you don't do that, then it actually becomes more difficult than the original NES game, because most enemies will take one hit and then hit you back, and you'll lose your lives really quickly. It's fun, but again, like I say, you need to kind of get used to how it works before you can properly enjoy it. After that came the first Game Boy game, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Fall of the Foot Clan. I was obsessed with this one as a kid, just because I was like 7, that was my thing, this was my jam. In hindsight, it's very basic, but certainly nothing wrong with it. It's a solid enough wee kind of action platformer where you just basically walk from left to right, attacking all the foot soldiers that come at you, all the Foot Clan. And it's fine, it's basic. There's weird kind of hidden mini games in it. There's one where Splinter turns up and asks you, if I'm remembering well, asks you basically what number am I thinking of, and you've got to guess. You've got a certain amount of guesses, and he says not higher or lower, and you've got to guess what the number is, which is pretty weird math mini games in a kids game. But there you go. But yeah, I have fun with this one. It's really basic, but you'll have a good time with it. It's not insulting in any way. After that came Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Turtles in Time, which came to the arcades first. The SNES version of this, which I'll get to in a minute, is one of my kind of top games of all time, like on anything. And the arcade one was fantastic too. The general idea is that Shredder has figured out how to transport the turtles back through time. So you start in the present day, and then eventually some weird stuff goes down, and Shredder appears and sends the turtles back in time. The arcade version is different from the SNES one, though there's a lot of kind of differences in it, which you'll get to, but regardless of which one you play, this is one of the greatest beat-em-ups ever made, and one of my favourite games of all time on either system. So Turtles in Time is almost worth the price of purchase for this whole compilation. Following on from Turtles in Time, there was another Game Boy title, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2: Back from the Sewers. And it's more of the same, really. The sprites have been greatly improved. They're a lot chunkier, and there's a cool kind of flip animation when you do a high jump. But other than that, the mechanics are really similar, the same sort of idea. So still kind of walking from left to right, attacking the Foot Clan and any other wee kind of beasties that appear. So it's more of the same. It's still fun, it's still harmless. But it's a nice wee bonus in the package, but it's certainly not one of the kind of top games on there. Then the NES got its third Turtles game, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3: The Manhattan Project, which is kind of built on the arcade game, which the NES got, but made it a kind of completely original new adventure. And the combat was fixed a bit better. It was far more satisfying attacking the enemies in this one. The turtles have their own special moves and stuff like that. So this is, of all the NES ones, in the modern era, this one's probably the most playable. The original one kind of slightly just behind it, but this is probably, of the NES ones, this is the one that stands up most to kind of modern day play. So it's worth a look. Then the SNES got a port of Turtles in Time, and this is the one that's my kind of favourite. It's in my top 5, if not top 10 of all time. It's really similar to the arcade one. It's actually a really, really, really faithful port. As you can see, if you go back and look at the arcade version and look at this one, Konami did a fantastic job of replicating it on the SNES. In fact, the SNES one's actually got some extra levels that weren't in the arcade, so there's like a Technodrome level and all that kind of stuff, and that messes about with the sequence. So in the arcade version, Shredder would appear in the sewers and send you to back in time, whereas in the SNES one you would continue beyond the sewers to the Technodrome and actually fight Shredder, and then he would send you back through time. So it's actually one of those rare situations where a home version is better than the arcade version back in the day. And so yeah, the SNES Turtles in Time is a phenomenal game, one of my favourites ever. Now the Mega Drive turns up at this point, and it didn't get Turtles in Time or anything like that before it, but it got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Hyperstone Heist, which is a kind of weird, almost kind of, it's like a weird kind of director's cut montage best of the original arcade game and Turtles in Time, with its own kind of stuff in it. So it's only got 5 levels, but they're 5 quite long levels, and the sprites in combat are taken from Turtles in Time, and some of the levels are, but then some of the levels are taken from the original arcade game as well, and then it's got like 1 or 2 kind of unique stages that aren't in any of the arcade games. So the Hyperstone Heist is this weird kind of remix game almost, which it'll be a fun one to play when you get the compilation. If you play through the arcade game and then play through Turtles in Time, when you then play the Hyperstone Heist, you'll be able to see, oh, that bit's from that one and that one's from the other, and this bit is just totally new. So it's quite cool. It's another really nice beat 'em up. There's a load of great beat 'em ups in this compilation, which is fantastic. But Hyperstone Heist is certainly a really good game too. At this point, Street Fighter fever was absolutely kind of thriving, and loads of companies started making their own one-on-one fighting games, and Konami was no different. So they actually made 3 completely different games called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters, and every console got a completely different game. So the SNES version is the one that's closest to Street Fighter and probably the one that's most fun to play. You've got kind of 4 action buttons in this one: light punch, strong punch, light kick, strong kick, and you could kind of combat that, fight against other opponents. It's probably kind of the best of the bunch. Then you had the Mega Drive version, which only had 2 attack buttons, just a punch and kick. A completely different game, completely different roster, completely different story. Some nonsense about travelling through space and fighting clones and stuff like that. This one's also good, but like the SNES one, they're both extremely difficult games. Even when you turn the difficulty down a bit, it's still quite difficult to win a fight until you really stick with it. So these are arguably just as difficult as some of the other Turtles games on here, but both good in their own way. I would say the SNES one's quite a bit better, but the Mega Drive one's still an interesting wee entry. Cowabunga! Then you got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters on the NES, which is a nice wee surprise, and it's great as well. It's actually a really competent fighting game, which for the NES didn't have a lot of those. Like on the 16-bit consoles you couldn't move for fighting games, but the NES didn't have a lot of really good ones, and this is one of them. It's actually really good fun to play still, so that's one of the kind of surprises. And then rounding things off is perhaps the kind of hidden gem in this whole compilation is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 Radical Rescue on the Game Boy. This is actually like a really early Metroidvania game, like before Symphony of the Night and all the like did it. You start as Michelangelo and the other 3 turtles have been kidnapped, so you have to basically explore this large open map of interconnected stages, interconnected rooms, and kind of find all the other turtles, and they've got their own abilities that can then be used to go. It's basically a Metroidvania game with its own map and everything, and it kind of flew under a lot of people's radars, I think, just because at this point in the Game Boy's life, as soon as you saw a tie-in, a licensed tie-in, you thought, not interested in that. But Radical Rescue is actually a really good game, and might actually be the kind of, this will be the one when people buy the compilation, they'll all be going, oh, this is actually a fantastic game. This is a sort of thing that some sites will write articles about, saying, hey, don't miss this one out, this is the hidden gem in the compilation. So yeah, that's it. That's a great way to round it off as well. So there you go, that's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Cowabunga Collection, 13 games. 2 arcade games, 4 NES games, 2 SNES, 2 Mega Drive, 3 Game Boy, and this was the era when Konami were just fantastic. The Turtles games in particular, there wasn't really a bad one among them. Maybe the NES arcade game has aged the worst, but again, like I say, with a bit of kind of time with it and you figure out how the combat actually works, then you're good to go. That and the Mega Drive Tournament Fighters are the only 2 kind of ones that modern players will probably go, that's not great, but that means there's 11 great games still left there, so I really can't wait for this. Hopefully that video was of use. Please do the usual like and subscribe and stuff, and go to titledhack.com for more retro gaming goodness. Until then, I will catch you later. Cheers guys, bye bye.